Let's sketch some stuff. Not like in that direction. Let's mess with some ink. I don't want to keep doing grids and stuff like that, because then that limits what you have available to purchase on shirts and interact with, and what you're seeing created. There's part of me that just wants to make some like larger blockhead things, just like bigger faces. I like the square. But just like blowing those up to a larger scale. Hello, Vita. Maybe a while ago, where this sort of started doing a little bit more of the blockheads was trying to imitate some illustrations that might be used in children's books and stuff, or illustrations for just children's stuff, but using some of those aesthetics and building out from there and trying to like simplify into some basic shapes and doing faces from there, and focusing on the sort of forms that and angles that come about from basic shapes. So I might just do something like that, where I'm maybe increasing the number of sides. Pentagonal. I don't really like anything that has a hint of a pointed head, but it's not more exaggerated. Hexagonal. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I do not know how to offhandedly draw something that has 7 sides, because it's non-divisible. I do know how to draw an octagon offhand, and I think that's about as many sides as I can get away with. I think it would maybe have to be the inclusion of some... Okay, I think I might mess with this. I might take somewhere I have a grid, like a basic grid. Here we go. And tape a piece of paper on top of that and start just drawing faces with shapes that fit within each of these squares, but instead of making a larger grid, just have a little bit more playfulness in the form, since they will be... Yeah, come on, give me one piece of paper. There we go. Okay. Since it's a little bit more personality. So let's just go with a square. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I think 5 by 5 might be a better sort of thing. This is just for my own sake. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, we're going to try and draw 25 different faces that all fit within these boundaries. So I'll start as just, I think I might just draw shapes first and then come back and fill in. The faces, but this time have them all be oriented the same way, where previous times I've drawn things and they have different orientations, but this time around I'll keep things a little bit more consistent. Hexagon. Now we're going to do another triangle, but this time have it be a little bit different. Get a nice rhombus going. Change up this pentagon. This is challenging my basic geometry thing of trying to remember the names of shapes and what angles can and can't be used with basic shapes. It's actually mildly challenging to me to just fill out different shapes into a space, because I haven't had to in a long time. I guess it's just a quadrilateral. It's not a parallelogram. Let's get a trapezoid going. Trapezoid is 2 parallel sides. Hello in India. Thank you, Ritz. Alright, same person for both of those, but appreciate it. I don't want to do a circle in the middle, that seems too predictable. Hello, Mary. Mariam. I'm not sure. Different trapezoid. Mariam, okay. Almost done with this shape section. Right now I'm just doing a bunch of shapes. So I started by revisiting. I started doing some of these blockhead things out of trying to create illustrations that seem kind of like children's illustrations for books or something like that. But I wanted to try and push that to a larger grid, but have a different sort of restriction and see how that works. Because I usually have some sort of form that's driving the direction of the work, and most recently I've been using the grid to draw elongated faces that fit within these shapes but play a little bit more with it. In this, I'm trying to have the shapes be varied but the grid be a little bit more rigid, and I plan on having all of these have the same orientation. I have not done an octagon yet. Octagon time. It's also a way for me to brush up on my basic geometry. So right now I'm just drawing shapes. But I'll come back and put faces in them in a moment. And I'll see how it goes. But I'm trying to possibly have the faces reflect the shapes as well. And create something that's got a little bit more personality, maybe. And seeing how little elements affect the understanding of the sort of personality of the faces that are being drawn. So this one looks snobbier. I'm using Sumi ink, which is Japanese ink. Thank you for the animation thing. I think my work looks smooth because it's all new every time. Every frame is a new drawing, so everything's moving. I don't have to be as precise with my drawings because it's all new every time, so it smooths out rough edges because everything's rough, if that makes sense. I don't know Peter draws offhand, There's a chance I'm familiar with it, but right now I do not know. I do 15 frames per second. I think that's another way that my work sort of is unique in that way, because it's smoother than traditional animation, being 12 frames per second. Because it's faster moving than that, you have what ends up being like 25% more frames. I think that's how the math works, because it's 3 more frames. 3 is 25%. If there's a skateboard company that wants to try and do something, I'm open to that. I just don't know how best to facilitate those sorts of things. It's a lot of work to get those going if you don't have the connections already. Hello, Marine. Move this a little bit closer. I'll look. Thank you. Hope you have a good day too. If you have questions about how I'm animating things ever, feel free to reach out. I'll do my best to answer. I can't guarantee that I'll answer in a timely manner, but I'm open and try to answer questions if I can. Okay. Now let's look at it off the grid. For this one, I'm going to scan it and fill it in the solids digitally. Oh, here's yesterday's. Let you guys look at that. Hello. Hello. D. Wilkes. Hello. CNR Lifestyle Systems. I forget what the thing is. Fleet Systems. Weird that I went Lifestyles. And hello, Zay. I don't necessarily know how to say everyone's name, and I'm sorry about that. This one. Heads. Set my laptop down because I'm scanning at a high resolution because this one that's in there is a little bit smaller. Today's going to be a shorter stream. Small, I'm going to write that this was 11/7/20. I'm American, which means that I put my dates funky. It trips people up because this looks like July 7th to a good portion of the world. I don't know why, historically, why Americans write the date, month, day, year, and not year, or either year, month, day, or day, month, year. Seems like the sort of thing I would have looked up at some point. And I might have, but I've forgotten if I have. Okay, let me open this up. Decent size. Should pretty much fall on a grid. And okay, now I will show you guys I'm working. Just filling in these solids after I darken up the lines a bit. How's that line up? That looks pretty good. This is a much easier one to track whether or not I've filled everything in because it is set up on a grid. Okay. I think a little bit more variation might be better for a future thing, but it works. Okay. Throw this image in here. Pull this down. I gotta make it a little bit smaller just for the fact that I think my phone crops it a little bit when I'm working. Anyway, there's some faces. Not too much going on with this is a thing today. Get a little bit faster. Trying something a little different. I think these look most interesting as individual faces at different scales. Okay, I think that's pretty much it. I don't have too much else happening. I just wanted to see what it looked like in physical form to fill in one of those guys. It's an interesting, just sort of quick design, but I want to push it further. But it's a thing. Thank you all for watching. You got any questions, throw them out, and I'll try my best to answer in a relatively quick manner. Not sticking around so long today. I gotta prepare for some stuff. This next week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, New York time. I won't be streaming, but I'll plan on coming back Saturday and working on something. My things will be available. I'm not using a light box right here. I typically just use tracing paper. I do have like a cheap light box thing that I got. Works okay, but I'm still getting used to it. I got it on Amazon, and I got it out of curiosity, but also because it seemed possibly more portable. And I wanted to see what it was like to have an adjustable brightness to it. But I found that I mostly just used it at its brightest setting. It also works decently in the sense that it's USB powered. But because it is a touch bar, a lot of the time I accidentally turn it on. Otherwise, I've got. I don't teach at a university. I've taught very small situations, but never anything that was like a paid deal. A little bit here, I instruct some people, but it's a lot of work to create something that is a teaching lesson, a lesson plan, and I would need a lot of practice in order to get to a point where I felt confident and comfortable with teaching people how to do something. I'm fine explaining what I'm doing, but it's a different thing. I feel differently personally if I'm given some sort of title that implies that I am something of a I don't want to say expert, that sounds weird, but a source of information. I get concerned when I feel uncomfortable when I'm given that much authority. I think authority is the word I was looking for. Because in my own pursuits, I find that the official way is not always the best way for me, and I don't want to impose that on anybody else. So I say, this is how I do it, here's why I do it, but to say, here is how it is done is a different sort of has a different meaning to it. And it can make me uncomfortable. I didn't study illustration. I studied graphic design, which has illustrative elements in it, depending on what your focus is and what you're creating. This chair is very squeaky, and I'm leaning back. Animation I got into when I took a week-long summer course that just went over some computer programs, some various things that I think all are now owned by Adobe, but it included Macromedia Flash and After Effects. And that was like a very, that was very much an introduction to animating and understanding a little bit of some terminology and how digital animation functions. I kept doing Flash animation for a while. I didn't like how things tweened typically. It always looked too smooth, too perfect, so a lot of the time, even in Flash, I had to animate frame by frame. Enjoyed animation, and then started doing flipbooks here and there, and then lost some motivation for animation after finding out how large animation teams are and wanting to have a sense of ownership over the work that I was producing. And not to say that you can't in that situation, but when I was in high school, I was very self-oriented, and so that didn't appeal to me. So I shifted a bit more towards graphic design, and that's what I went to college for. And I have a BFA, a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Graphic Design. But while I was there, I started pursuing animated GIFs and doing a bit of things here and there with those formats, and started doing rotoscoping, which is where you trace over the individual stills from a film or video. If you're working in a different space, when you say rotoscoping, a lot of people, their context for that is if you are frame by frame isolating some element from film or video. And it functions similarly. You're still tracing something frame by frame. But when I think about it as an animation tool. And I did that. And then I had a trackpad, but I didn't have any sort of tablet, Bamboo, otherwise Cintiq. I could have used one retrospectively, but it was in a specific area of the school. Didn't have it in my dorm room. And I didn't like going somewhere to work. I liked working in my space. And so I started using tracing paper and clipping it to my laptop to animate on there. Started getting some traction with that, and I was getting tired of updating my portfolio for graphic design. And so that was tedious, and the animation that a lot of people would find tedious, I found to be engaging and motivating in a different way than revisiting and refining pre-existing work that I had. And I got some work animating, and so I have been pursuing that since then. Any other questions? Thoughts, concerns? I go through that general trajectory kind of frequently, so apologies if you've heard that before, if you're revisiting from a previous live stream. Thank you. Salome. Sorry if I'm saying your name terribly. I didn't part my hair great this afternoon. No, it's just silence. This is the best for live broadcast. So this isn't really broadcast. Live streaming. Any other questions, thoughts, concerns, comments, curiosities? Again, I'm not going to be streaming weekdays this upcoming week, but I plan on being back Saturday. Yeah, so I won't be posting this week, which is okay. If you get an itch for watching me work on something, I have previous live streams from the last month and change, 2 months? When did I really in earnest start doing this? I've got a record of it. A little under 2 months. Been doing this since September 18th. No, 17th was when I was really starting to do this in earnest, and then had little gaps here and there. No, that's just organization. So there are live streams up from most of those days. There's 1 or 2 where I missed, and then at the start I was not recording the streams. But on YouTube, if you search TraceLoops, you can go to YouTube, search TraceLoops, and there will be 30 hours plus of me streaming. You might get a little bit disoriented because the comments aren't present. So let's look at what you said. Different branches of design. I say just don't limit yourself to anything in particular. Have a focus. Having a focus is best for communicating to other people what it is that you do. You could ask people who work in those fields and see what their experiences are like. It's a little bit awkward to do that when you're starting out, but as you get older, you find a different comfort because it's what do I have to lose by messaging this person and saying hey, can you give me advice? If they say no or don't respond, whatever. And if they say yes and give you great life advice, cool. I got a subscriber probably from this bit. But different branches of design, it can also be trivial what categorizes something as one branch of design or another. It's just a way to better communicate to people what it is that you do, but it's not the end all be all. Just see what you like and try it out. And if you don't like it as much once you've tried it out, then that's probably not for you. What are challenges as a graphic designer? What was the most difficult when you started? Challenges as a graphic designer, or just doing client work in general, is finding a balance, especially for what sort of thing I'm doing, where I have sort of a personal projection of brand identity. I don't like saying that, but it is sort of what it is. Finding a balance between your wants and needs and the client's wants and needs and expectations. Clearly laying out expectations is frustrating and difficult at times, but it saves a lot of time, energy, heartbreak, difficulty if you can explain clearly what it is that you're creating and the client can understand and communicate what they are expecting. because most instances of disappointment and frustration that I've experienced both in personal and professional situations is not communicating expectations clearly. Uh, it's something I've had to learn, because there's the ideal thing is like you don't have to say anything and you just understand each other completely, which is an ideal situation but isn't much, doesn't really function practically. And worst case scenario, if you're communicating more directly, is that you realize, oh, this person doesn't want what I want, and that's better than finding that out like however long into the project or other things. Where do I get inspiration for creating such plasticity and movement for objects? I just like seeing how motion works. I don't know how to say. Also, it's looking at like cartoons, movement, pre-existing things. I have a sense of like what it feels to squeeze or move something a lot. I like trying to, I get like a sort of visceral connection to things that are largely simplified. Um, like if I see the shadow of a rotating form, I get more excitement and enjoyment out of the disconnect between the actual object and the shadow and the three-dimensional form that's implied by those outlines and such. I feel like I almost get a better understanding through seeing something that's simplified than if I see something that's overly complex. Uh, I really enjoy seeing the sort of, there's a TV show that I used to, or I still watch it here and there, but used to be on Home Movies was an animated cartoon show that started on WB and then didn't work there and was picked up by Adult Swim and ran there for 4 seasons. And if you're familiar with Bob's Burgers, a lot of those people work on the same thing. And I got that full series on DVD, and there's a bunch of commentary tracks. And that show, the initial sort of concept of it was don't have an idea and improv and then find the idea and edit things down from these massive collections of audio tracks, and just finding it and whittling it down to create a narrative from this massive existing thing. And that was Lauren Bouchard's job largely, or he did a lot of it. And he was, I think, an executive producer on that, but he's a creator of Bob's Burgers. And he also used to work on Dr. Katz, which was an animated series that was a therapist interviewing stand-up comedians, but it was, animated. And Jonathan Katz was the titular Dr. Katz for that. But Lauren Bouchard, there's something that I think about a lot. He talks about something that Jonathan Katz told him, and it's the fragility of a joke. That saying that a joke is very fragile, and I think about that when I create motion or shape, where the simpler you make something, the more the limited amount of information that you're presenting affects the understanding of it. So very small changes in simplified objects, designs, communication can wildly affect what the understanding of it is. So in that simplification of form, object, shape, motion, you're telling a lot more with a lot less, and that's something that I get excited by. It also sort of relates to some other quotes that I like that they all get attributed to Mark Twain, but there's not really I think one is Mark Twain, but there's a bunch of people who get attributed with the quote, I wrote you a long letter because I didn't have the time to write a short one. And that's the idea that communicating something succinctly and clearly takes a lot more time and effort than overly complex language or just like writing 10 sentences to communicate something that you could communicate in one sentence, but it's very, very fragile. And then there's also another quote from him that's, I think this one is actually Mark Twain, that the difference between the right word and the wrong word is the difference between lightning bug and lightning, where like that little bug or not bug is the difference between this little flashing guy going, if I don't know if lightning bug is something you're familiar with. It's a little bioluminescent insect that flies around in the summer and it flashes light. But the difference between this harmless little guy that just flashes and you see this little thing and this massive force of nature that destroys trees and buildings. Do you prefer animation drawing frame by frame on paper, or do you use digital edits from the start? And do you have any tips for beginners in animation? I'm going to get back to that in 1 second and just answer the how do you combine 2 cameras in live. I'm using OBS, which is a open source broadcast program to create a stream, and then using something called Yellow Duck will push it to Instagram Live. And if Instagram ever stops that support, then I will likely pivot to starting these and showing them on Twitch, which is just a more open sort of platform. But back to, do you prefer analog animation? I do. It looks better and feels better to me. Or do you also use digital edits from the start? A lot of the time I'll refine some elements digitally. Sometimes I do start with more of a digital space if there's anything that I have to time out to sound and I want to see how that movement looks and reacts before really committing the time and effort that it takes to do it analog, because I did not learn that process of keyframing and such like that. I work better if like I have the sound and I can see how something moves and then build from there, at least to get those keyframes, those key movements, and get a better understanding of how it relates to the other elements. I will also, if I'm rotoscoping something, and I might edit it digitally to start into it. Something like slit scan stuff, where I don't have an example right here, but I might do After Effects and do like a rough edit that shows the movement and is clear enough to me that I can refine that motion and trace it and create an animation from it. That's a lot more refined and smooth. I'll do that, but most of the time I prefer to work analog because it's a comfortable space, it's unique, and it has a greater longevity. It's also something that comes across as being more accessible, which I think it is more accessible to some degree and not to others, but I want to present things as they are, and the most direct way that I can think to communicate something that's accessible as art is something on paper, ink on paper. It's a pretty accessible thing. Most people have access to those 2 elements. And if not, then you can find creative alternatives, but line and shape on paper is pretty refined. Animation or tips for beginners. I've found a lot of comfort and encouragement in rotoscoping, because it depends what sort of animation you're pursuing and what you mean by beginner, but rotoscoping is taking existing footage and tracing over each frame. It can feel very tedious, but because you have a baseline, you have a source of information and pre-existing motion in that reference footage, there's less of a feeling of risk of it not moving the way that you want it to. So that was very helpful and encouraging to me. There's something that Ira Glass talks about where he's the host of This American Life. But he talks about how when you start off, you have to have some degree of like unwarranted confidence. You have to think what you're doing. You have to enjoy what you're doing and think what you're doing is much better than it is to have the motivation to continue doing. So, rotoscoping is a way to help with that. Because if you were to try and just like look at classic Disney animation or something where there's all of this groundwork that's put forward, even just in the professional process, but the pre-existing knowledge and learned practice of the animators. If you're just like, I'm not able to do that, and it's like, yeah, because that's teams and teams of people who are like paid and professional and have all these resources and time and effort supporting them. So don't get discouraged in that way. But if you rotoscope something, it looks like this is a cool thing that's specific to my experience and I have a connection to it. Looking at existing animation that you like and really looking at it, taking it apart frame by frame and seeing like, oh, that's how they did that. That's really helpful. And just keeping up with it. Like anything, working on it is the best way to work on it. Ideas. Or where do you get your ideas from? From wanting to know how things work and giving myself some different forms of limitation. I work very well if I give myself some confines. I like exploring, like, so with any sort of animation or any work, you can get burnt out by it in different ways. And so a lot of the time I see something that has nothing to do with animation or artwork, and I'm curious enough to study and explore how that thing works. A lot of the time it's different technology, or just remembering that something exists and being like, oh yeah, I want to know what that is, and giving myself the freedom, the time, and putting in the effort to better understand what that thing is, and the thought process that built that up can better inform my animation. I don't have a great example of that. These faces come out of a mixture of things. Even though these are still, these have a lot of let me turn this guy off. So these sorts of faces, when it comes to these like multiple faces, these are the idea of like stills in time and blur from motion being communicated in a still. In animation, you have you don't have natural motion blur. So if I go like this, my hand gets blurred and distorted because the sensor that's in this camera has a certain time that it is receiving light information onto the sensor. And if I'm moving my hand quickly, my hand is moving too fast for it to be just from one position, and so you're getting that mixture of light energy. You don't have that native motion blur in animation, so you have to create it through various means. And so this sort of like triple face comes out of some of the practices that people have for creating what are called animation smears. So going from moving very quickly, you have to create these weird in-between smeared distortions of time and form. But I like seeing those as isolated pieces. So that still drawing comes from mixture of things for how film is created, stored, that influences how people have to recreate motion blur and stuff like that in animation. But animation has its own restrictions, so you have to work around it, and then you can present that same information in a different format and recontextualize it to better understand your perception of things. This is going all over the place, and I'm not sure if I'm making sense at all. And explore larger concepts through simplified means. Hello, Nicole. So that's where I get inspiration from. Asking someone where they get inspiration from is something that you want a clear-cut answer. You want, like, I get inspiration from this particular one thing. And if you take that particular one thing and look at it, you'll get the same inspiration. But that's not true. Most people don't think that way, where like it's just this one thing. You can really enjoy and like something, but to try and isolate and replicate someone else's inspiration is something a bit futile. You can probably better understand that person if they explain where they find comfort or enjoyment and explore recreating things or stuff like that. But you just have to give yourself some degree of freedom, I think, is the main thing, and not believe that you're going to have this instantaneous flash of inspiration because you asked someone else and they explained their inspiration. You know, just sort of explore a lot. How much time does it take to create an Instagram post? Varies wildly. Can be, this initially was like 20 to 30 minutes to draw something, but then I kept talking. So I can have something that takes like 5 seconds, 10 seconds to draw and then scan and then post on Instagram. There's post work that has to be done as well. And then I have stuff that takes like 4 days. And it might occupy the same amount of space and the same amount of time, but it's just a different thing. Pretty much anybody who gives you a super straight, confined answer is probably doing a lot of the same work consistently, but also like most artists and artwork doesn't have like a set time that it, or inspiration that it exists within, unless you're getting to a point where it's the only thing you're doing and it's such an automated process that it's not going to be helpful or beneficial for you to ask someone who's in that space where their inspiration comes from or how much time they're committing to it, because they've spent so much time, effort, and have learned how to present and create things with such a refined process that it wouldn't reflect the average person's interaction with those things or that process. Journey of finding art style, working for a while, seeing what I liked, pursuing that. A lot of the time people want more clear answers to things, and you can give like key moments, but as far as like creating a narrative story based on your experiences that is succinct and easy to follow doesn't make sense. Unless you find it when you're super young and then that's just what you are locked into for life. I do stuff that's not like this. I do like glitchy internet cultured stuff here and there. But it's much more chaotic and less refined. This is a thing. Tiny Concert asking, hey man, love your animation style. What program do you use to edit your drawings together? I will scan things just using image capture on my Mac. And then depending on how long it is and how it's being used, I'll either import those stills into Photoshop, edit them down a little bit, and if it's short enough or if it's like an animated GIF or something, then I can save it out from Photoshop. But most of the time, I ultimately end up in either After Effects or Premiere because they've got better export options. And so from Photoshop, I'll save out the stills as a series of images, as an image sequence, and then import those into into After Effects or Premiere, and then save it from there. Today, I drew this in about like 20 minutes, and then I've been talking for like 30 minutes. Oh, what am I drinking? Oh, it's water. But it's in a green cup. So you said, what are you drawing? Okay, that went for a longer post-discussion than I thought. And what am I drinking? It being water. Sounds like a good place to jump off. Sorry if I can give more specific things if you ask more specific questions, but it's difficult to answer questions like, what's your inspiration? Or how do you think of your ideas? Because it's pretty broad. But I can do my best to answer questions. Just more specific questions will get more exact answers. Thank you all for watching. Thanks for asking questions. This one had more discussion element to it. If you want to watch more of these, you can go onto that YouTube I was talking about. Don't know if you heard that. Don't know if you heard about that. That was my joke because everyone knows the YouTubes. If you search TraceLoops on YouTube, it'll pop up and you can watch a bunch of these previous live streams. Most of them don't have this degree of discussion at the tail end, though some of them have some. And some are more intricate with the work that's being produced and longer form for the amount of time that's committed to creating an animation or something like that. The last few days I've had things that I needed to do following streaming, and so I've opted to do stills. But if you go back a little bit further, you can find some 4-hour broadcasts, which is not what I want to do today. Again, thank you all for watching. I will not be streaming the weekdays this week, but plan on coming back Saturday. And yeah, thank you all. I'm going to head out now.